So last week, the Overwatch League released the Role Star list for Season 3, and a lot of people have been asking for my opinion on it, so I figured I would do a little reaction video to let you guys know how I'm feeling about it all. If you don't know what Role Stars are, essentially it's when experts pick who they believe to be the top players at all three roles. Given that it's an exclusive award, the players who receive this honor get a Role Star symbol next to their names during a game. What I would like to do is list off who made the cut, briefly discuss the selections I agree with, then go over the picks I disagree with, and I'll be sure to bring up players I would have picked instead for any of the Role Stars I disagree with in this video. And you guys know me, I'm going to be explaining myself every step of the way. So yeah, that's what we've got on the agenda for today. Let's get started by taking a look at the Season 3 Role Stars. Oh, and if you want to check out the article about the announcement, then make sure to look in the link in the description if you want to check it out for yourself. So, the 13 men representing the Role Stars in 2020 are as follows. On DPS, Fleta, Carpe, Sparkle, Ans, and Lip. Your representatives on Tank are Fearless, Void, Choyobin, and Krong. And the supports are Lee Jae-gun, Alarm, FD God, and Violet. All in all, it's not a bad list. None of these players are undeserving of high recognition. Each and every one of them are fantastic players who accomplished a ton in 2020. But is every single one of them the most deserving to get this level of praise? Well, I would say no. More on that in a bit. Let's focus in on what I like first. So DPS has a few strong picks. Carpe and Fleta I am all in for. I won't go into crazy detail given I recently devoted an entire video where I appreciated the two of them and what they've done this year, so I'm going to keep it short. So both of them were in my top 3 on the MVP ballot. This is pretty much as good as it gets. My number 1 hit scan and my number 1 flex DPS this year. These guys were top tier on pretty much everything they played while leading their teams to the number 1 record in the APAC region and North American region respectively. They're both near the top of the league with final blows, they both have well over 2,000 eliminations, and they're both in the top percentile with hero damage. And let's not forget they were both league leaders in overtime team fights with no advantage. Carpe averaged an absurd number of final blows, and Fleta had a win rate well over 60%. There's a whole bunch of other specific achievements listed off that you can read into through the article I linked if you'd like to. Anyway, these guys were dominant among their peers and they were super clutch. I would have been shocked if either of these guys missed out on this honor, so that's fine. However, the other 3 selections are pretty take it or leave it, but as I said before, more on those guys in a bit. For now, we're going to talk about tanks, and at this role, I think they got half of them right. The Void and Krong selections are right on point. I've gone over it a million times already. In my eyes, Void was the top dog at his position in 2020. He might not necessarily be number 1 on every single off-tank hero, but he's always going to be top tier and very reliable nonetheless. His consistency is better than pretty much anybody else, and in my opinion, he had the greatest season by an off-tank player in League history. Instead of going over a lot of the typical stuff that I say about Void, I'm going to let the article take it away this time. On all off-tank heroes, he is 3rd in hero damage, 5th in final blows, and 3rd in team fight win rate. I'm a little disappointed that they failed to mention the historic death rate though. He is one of 2 people to average less than 3 deaths per 10 on D.Va, and he still hasn't broken 500 total deaths on the year with 23 hours of playtime, by the way. He was my number 2 MVP pick for a reason. Now for Krong though, I have similar words of praise for him. This rookie crushed it. Despite being the only rookie in the starting lineup for the charge, this dude was a complete monster. He might not have had the same crazy stats as Void across the board, but they're still pretty similar, especially with the death rate. But the thing about his damage stats being worse is that Krong had different responsibilities. His team depended on him to play a lot more cautiously. But don't let that deceive you from the fact that he still popped off big time. You don't make the top 10 in the MVP selections for no reason after all. Krong is one of the best decision makers I've ever seen. He does all the little things right, and he can step up when he needs to as well. He has proven that multiple times on the year. When this guy's on the Sigma or D.Va, then you better look out. Krong was a top 5 off-tank in the league, no question. Now for the supports. So this is probably the position I have the least number of problems with. Violet, Alarm, and Lee Jae-gun all check out. Starting with Violet, I mean, he was an MVP candidate as well. After the Shock's initial hiccup at the start of the year, this man played a completely different game. He was out of his mind. His playmaking abilities at the flex support position are matched by very few. With the exception of his Ana, which isn't even as bad as people say, by the way, he was top tier on all other flex support heroes. In my opinion, his Baptiste is number 1 without a question. Top 2 in all damage categories kind of speaks for itself, and being top half in the league in healing also has its perks. Violet tends to be very clutch on this hero, most notably coming from his performances in the May Melee tournament when Bap was at his most played probably. And the same kind of stuff translates over to his Zen. He's tied for top final blows, he's number 1 in elims, he's second in damage, and number 1 in healing by a good margin. He's had some very dominant performances on Zenyatta this year. And I know we tend to think lesser of these heroes, but his Moira and Brig were pretty crazy too. The individual achievements go on and on. I mean, look at all of the different stats he's top tier in. He has a pretty decent achievement list going for him in the Roll Stars article. Violet has been a key piece for the Shock all year, so it was absolutely necessary to include him. Alright, but how about Alarm now? He was easily the most deserving person in the support category, no question to me. In my opinion, he is the best flex support in the game currently, and he has been for quite some time. Remember how I brought up Violet's achievement list in this article? Well, Alarm kind of takes that to a whole new scary level. His list was the largest in this article, and it's not particularly close. I mean, just look at it. He has the second highest win rate in the Overwatch League on all heroes combined, and that speaks volumes about the level of consistency he has shown across the various metas this year. Some of the other big time achievements that really jump out on this list are being number 1 in final blows on Zen, second in teamfight wins as Ana, and first in 2 different Brigitte damage categories. My personal favorite thing to look at though is the total healing on the year. Keep in mind that these stats do not include the NA playoffs either. Being number 1 in healing while being a primary playmaker goes to show you how valuable he is towards the team's success. It's important to mention that he has some of the best positioning in the league too. He's always in the right place at the right time, which really helps explain his low death rate on heroes like Ana and Zen. When you are arguably top 3 or better on everything you play, then it's hard to not call you the number 1 flex support, you know? Alarm was a massive no-brainer, so it's good to see the league get this right. Now, of course, we have to talk about Lee Jae-gon. If the league was really pushing for at least one main support to make the cut, then this was probably the right call to make. We all know about his crazy aggressive Lucio already. That's what makes him so special. The way he plays it really works in the Shanghai system. Lucio was played a ton this year, but he still had the 4th highest win rate on that character regardless. But it's not just his top tier Lucio that makes him shine. His Brig was legit. 3rd in damage with at least 500 teamfights speaks for itself. If you're doing a lot of damage and you're not feeding, then you're doing your job because you get those Brig passive heals going off constantly. And even his Mercy has proven to be serviceable with a top 7 lowest death rate and a top 3 heal rate among all Mercy players with at least 1 hour of playtime. So needless to say, I'm a big fan of this selection. Alright, so those are the selections I am very, very satisfied with. Now let's go back and discuss the ones I either completely disagree with or think had better options available. Let's start with the big one. DPS had 3 selections I'm not exactly satisfied with. Ons, Lip, and Sparkle all don't make my personal cut. All of them have their perks. I'm not going to deny their greatness by any means. Ons, in my opinion, was the best sniper in the league this year. At the very least, he was the number 1 Widowmaker and a top tier Ashe player. My problem with Ons though is that he wasn't exactly needed across the entire season, you know? The Shock still did post similar results with other DPS combinations. Ons was amazing, but there's other DPS players who are more deserving who carried more, and I don't even think he's the most deserving DPS on his team for that matter. Now for Lip. I have less of an issue with him, but I still would have taken a few guys over him. Lip definitely was depended on by his team though. His Sombra play was a huge reason why they won as many games as they did this year, at least with the big games. Without his efforts, I'm not sure if they make that comeback against the Seoul Dynasty in the May Melee. His Sombra is number 1, and I think his Ashe and Widow were pretty darn good too, but those 2 heroes in particular weren't top tier because he was nowhere close to invincible. The thing with Lip though that you have to remember is that he plays alongside the league MVP. Fleta does a ton of the dirty work himself, obviously, so while Lip is depended on, it's not to the same extent as other hard carry DPS who don't really have that superstar next to them in Season 3. And lastly, we have Sparkle, and I think I understand why the league picked him. His dominance on Genji was unlike anything we've ever seen at the Overwatch League level. It was the driving force behind the Paris Eternal Summer Showdown run and dominant overall summer before the playoffs began. He made some massive plays in those tournament matches. Not only was he a big-time playmaker in the Philly series, but also in the upset victory over the Shock just 1 round earlier. This is what signing a big-name prospect is all about, making those big plays in the clutch. Sparkle undoubtedly lived up to the hype during the Genji meta. He was the best on that character, no question. He's got the highest final blow rate, the highest elimination rate, and the highest damage rate per 10 minutes. He even set the new final blow rate record with 21.4 per 10 minutes. He played well in the meta he was around for the longest for. However, Outside of Genji, there was a lot to be desired, I feel. His flexibility off Genji was nothing to write home about. So when the league talks about him being #1 in final blows during team fights, I feel like it's a little misleading. Most of that does come on the Genji. When his team needed him to pick up Sombra or Mei, he was unable to really do so at a high level. You can say what you want about him being inexperienced on those heroes, but if you're going to be a role star level flex DPS, I feel like you have to show off a reliable hero pool. I'll leave it at this. Sparkle was good at the role he was comfortable on, but that simply isn't really role star worthy to me. Okay, so out of those three, the only one I would consider keeping is Lip, but that may be pushing it still. To replace one of these three to start, I think you simply have to put Decay in there, no question. Say what you will about him leaving Dallas the way he did, but nobody can deny what he did as an individual. I think it's fair to bring up the Dallas thing with him not being in the MVP race because you can't exactly be the most valuable player if you're leaving your team mid-season, but role stars are a bit different. Decay meets all the criteria of a role star. He played some of the most dominant Overwatch among all DPS players this year. There's no way Dallas win as many games as they do without Decay. I find it hard to believe they win some of their close games, like that 5-map series against the Valiant, or the Mei Melee matchup with the Outlaws, just to name a few. Decay was a high-impact player from start to finish, and he was an S-tier hitscan player. His Tracer and McCree were probably both top 5 in the league, and his Widow was very dangerous. Decay not getting a Role Star award is a crime. He proved he was the carry on 2 different teams, and yet he still doesn't get it. Speaking of carries, I am very surprised that KSP did not make the cut. Is it because the Valiant only finished 8th in the standings this year or something? I just don't understand how he doesn't make it over Sparkle or Ons. KSP has been the undisputed hard carry of the LA Valiant the entire season. Right from week 1 you could feel his impact, and it only got greater and greater as the season progressed. Like with Decay, he was top tier on multiple hitscan characters, the most notable of which would be his Ashe, and friendly reminder, Ashe was played a ton this year. I'm not the only one who has seen him take over countless games this year, right? How many times has he saved the Valiant from despair, or at least kept them in a game? I would say he is a big-time culprit for a majority of the Valiant's wins and close losses. His impact is shown firsthand. You guys remember how he tore up the Mayhem in the Rain in reverse sweep fashion, right? The Atlanta one in particular showed off his value as he got subbed in after the second map. KSP has meant everything to both the Valiant and the Overwatch League in general. Friendly reminder that he led the league in total final blows and eliminations. He also had the highest damage per 10-minute rate in the entire league. I'm kind of amazed that KSP did not even get a Role Star nomination given all of these achievements. How he managed to slip under the radar is beyond my imagination. My third and final DPS replacement selection is Birdring. I know the Gladiators were not all that successful this year, but Birdring was a major shining bright spot. A lot of the time the Glads were only competitive to begin with because of him. How many times did we see Birdring come up big in a close game? It was ridiculous. Birdring was arguably playing the best Overwatch of his career this year. That consistency he was lacking in previous years simply did not exist. He was a menace on whatever he touched, whether that would be Widow, McCree, Tracer, or even Junkrat. He was a superstar. He has all of the individual achievements to back it up. Birdring was #2 in the league for final blows, and he was one of 9 players to be a part of the 1 million total damage club. And let's not forget that he more than held his own against the elite hitscan players of the game like Carpe, KSP, Ant, and BQB. His ability to take over a game is better than most people, I can tell you that much. He had one of the top final blow to death ratios in the league. I'm very surprised to not see Birdring make the cut. So those are the 3 guys I have alongside Carpe and Fleta. A few other honorable mentions who almost made the cut include Rascal, Exy, BQB, and Ivy. Moving on to the tanks, I really don't have a huge issue with Fearless or Choyobin being here. Let that be known. It's more that I think there are other people who are slightly more deserving. Fearless, we'll start with him. He was arguably the best Winston in the league, his Reinhardt was amazing, and he was one of the better overall main tanks in the Overwatch League. Seeing him make this type of comeback story is really awesome. However, if the league really wanted a main tank that badly, I think they would have been better off with either Smurf or Sato. I get that Smurf is not as well-rounded technically because he tends to get benched in a Reinhardt meta, but he kind of makes up for it with his stellar Orisa play. He was #1 in elims and hero damage per 10 and was tied for 2nd in final blows, and more importantly, I felt like his pulls were simply better than everybody else's. He set up more opportunities than anybody else, and yet he doesn't get the credit for it. His Winston also should be known is really, really good. I don't know for sure if I would say he's better, but an argument can definitely be made that he is the best Winston too. Despite not playing Reinhardt, if you're either the best or second best on the other two main tank heroes, then you're arguably the league's most valuable main tank, I feel like. And I only have similar things to say about Sato. While I don't really think he was number one at any particular hero, he was like top 5 or better on all of them, and I would say his Rhine in particular was close to being the best. Given his prowess on the Rhine, it's within reason to argue Sato was the most well-rounded main tank in the Overwatch League this season. Philly decided to play around him this year for once, and it's painfully obvious how well it turned out. Look at his regular season totals. He put in the most work out of any main tank player, leading all main tanks in final blows, eliminations, and hero damage. With elims in particular, he finds himself top 3 among all players in general. Again though, I don't mind having Fearless. He's a perfectly fine selection. He had the highest tank win rate in the entire league. I just feel that Smurf and Sato have done more to deserve it. Choi's in a pretty similar boat. He was unreal levels of clutch this year. I've seen a lot of people severely underrate Choi Yobin, and I don't have the slightest clue why. He's got the highest team fight win rate on all off-tank heroes combined and the highest individual win rate on Sigma, and you can feel it when you watch the Shock play. Oftentimes, they win fights that they had no business being in to begin with, all because of his heroics. He's a phenomenal player who deserves this kind of praise. I just so happen to think one player in particular deserves it a bit more because of his accomplishments. And that player is Hanbin. To me, it was pretty clear that Hanbin was a better Sigma and Zarya, at least statistically. Hanbin was literally number 1 on all Sigma damage categories. Hanbin made the greater contributions on the hero in my eyes, and generally speaking, his team relied on him more to contribute. Hanbin had the most eliminations in the Overwatch League, and it really wasn't close. His 2,894 final blows is 200 more than second place. He also happens to be the only tank player in the Overwatch League with at least 1,000 final blows, 2,000 eliminations, and 1 million damage. He is literally the only one. Hanbin carried a bigger load for his team, so I think a Role Star appearance for him is a bit more deserved than Choi. Again though, let it be known that I don't really have a problem with Choi getting it. It's more that I think that Hanbin deserves it a tiny bit more. And last, but certainly not least, we have to have a discussion about FD God. I won't lie, he definitely had a spectacular season. His Lucio was nuts. The guy practically owned Lijiang Tower and other control maps. He was the king of making high impact environmental kills. Even though he played so aggressively, he still did manage to put in a lot of good healing numbers. And I was actually pleasantly surprised with his Brigitte as well. It wasn't just him being a Lucio one-trick. FD God was very well rounded with a high impact on Lucio in particular, and what makes FD God's years so special to me is that he often played with 4 to 5 Korean teammates at a time, but still found a way to make it work. However, I really wanted to see his teammate Fielder get the spot over him. I want to give the main support position a lot of love, but I feel like it doesn't really matter here because Fielder had such a crazy year. I'm not the first person to say it, but Fielder was a top tier flex support arguably while on 200 ping. Having the second highest average healing rate on BAP and Ana combined with that handicap is outstanding. He still somehow had some insane sleep darts too. It's hard to put into words how impressive that is, and it scares me to think about what he might have done if he had been with the Paris Eternal in North America this year. His days were probably very long given the time zone difference between America and Korea, and yet he never really showed any signs of fatigue. Fielder was an Iron Man, and I think he deserves high levels of recognition for it. With that said though, that pretty much wraps it up. Those are my overall thoughts on the 2020 Role Star selections. Most of these picks I'm completely fine with, but the league definitely did drop the ball in a few cases. But now I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on the 2020 Role Stars? Tell me down in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new to keep up with all of my new content. While you're at it, consider following my socials through the links in the description. And as always, thanks so much for watching. I really do appreciate your support, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.